The X-Men. You could say that this is arguably the perhaps most loved, ensemble of, heroes put together. I mean, of course, you have the Justice League, you have the Avengers, but there's just something about the X-Men that, rises well above so much of that, the other two groups have. And I think it really, for most people, myself included, we really resonate with the group that came from Giant Size X-Men. When we got introduced to so many new characters and they were able to be part of the team and so on. And so for me, it was kind of interesting because, as a kid, especially where I live, you didn't have access to a lot of comics and, getting them, of course, we didn't have Amazon or any of those delivery services back in those days. But getting a chance to see, friends who had actually been able to get to the States and, come back, with a lot of comic book titles and see different images, it really sparked and, piqued my interest as to what, was actually this entire, ensemble about. And it's very fortunate now that in today's time, we get a chance to, have access to all of this and, be able to read so much of this. And more than anything, I'm a huge fan of collected editions. And that being said, a lot of people who I know ask me and say, why don't you put a video together of, your favorite X-Men Omnibuses? Now, of course, you have wonderful channels, like the Comic Book Report, you have New Mint Condition, you have Gem Mint, and so on. Channels which I'm sure many of you follow, which I follow as well, and they've done some awesome, countdown lists. But it kind of inspired me to sort of say, okay, if I had to really think about it, since I've collected so many now, what would be the top 5? Now, of course, I've cheated a little bit because I just couldn't whittle that down to 5. It had to be 6. So do forgive me, but 6 is where it's going to be. And with that, where do I really begin? Well, my expected journey actually starts with this one, which is X-Men by Chris Claremont and Jim Lee. This is obviously volume 2. And this actually has, a great run of stories. I love the artwork. I mean, that cover itself. I remember a friend of mine who was a huge fan of the X-Men. And what he essentially did was that he had a comic or the issue which had this cover on it. And I always used to dream at that point, like when I could get it. And well, finally, many years later, I did. And this is something that, is a big standout to me. I mean, I would never part with my copy of this, and I absolutely love it. I mean, you've got so many interesting stories in here, and you've got, a whole range of different things. Not to mention how much people love that swimsuit special and the pull-out, posters that you have at the back of the book. So this is definitely something that I really enjoy. The next one is, of course, Fatal Attractions, and I was kind of debating and on the fence, which is why it could nearly be 5, but I said, you know what, I have to include it. And the funny thing is that New Mint Condition also mentioned that we are going to get the Omnibus in Feb next year, so guys, look out for that. The cool thing about this story was that it was something that a friend had also told me about, and finally when I got a chance to read it, you get to see, that ultimate battle between Magneto and Wolverine. And you can imagine how much of pain that character is in, getting the adamantium ripped out of him. That way, and obviously later on discovering that he had bone claws all along. But I think this is a really interesting story. It goes into so many different directions. It talks about that breaking point, really talking about that breaking point in this particular story arc where the characters are pushed to actually take that kind of decision. So this is obviously something that where Magneto is called into question about his actions out here. So this would be my you could say 5th choice, if I was to put it that way. And coming in at number 4, I would actually have to go with the Uncanny X-Men volume number 3. Obviously, this has a ton of great stories. It has, so many things by Chris Claremont, Dave Cockrum, and, many other artists as well. You have, the Frank Miller Wolverine kind of story, which is included out here. You have many other stories to do with, Magneto and Kitty Pryde and, obviously Kitty Pryde and Colossus. You also have the first appearance, if I remember correctly, of the Morlocks. You have the wedding of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor. So it really has, it's action-packed straight through and so on. And I know many people would cite this as their favorite X-Men Omnibus. But for me, there are a few others which I think, go above this one. And again, it's just my opinion, guys. I would love to hear from you as to what you think. So do let me know in the comments below. But moving on, my next book, which I would actually enjoy, is this one. This to me is like, even for new collectors, something you could definitely have in your collection, which is X-Men Age of Apocalypse. And trust me, I mean, this is a story that was, so defining. I'm a kid of the 80s and 90s, right? So I remember when this story was coming out, and I had all these friends, who were updating me about so many things. And of course, at that time, I must confess, while I say all these things about not having access to things, I was more of a DC fan at that point than a Marvel fan. And the X-Men was sort of, like this outlier group that I sort of, had a sort of an interest in. Obviously, Wolverine was my favorite character, as he is for many. But this particular story, I remember, was, earth-shattering. So for those who were following it and able to get access to the single floppies, and were actually going along with the story, this was something that stood out in a big way. And it's a colossal event. I mean, in so many ways. No pun intended by that. But Age of Apocalypse, definitely something to check out. For those who haven't read it, you'll enjoy it for sure. And this one, which is my number 2 choice, might be a surprise for everyone because it's the X-Men animated series, the adaptation. So for those of us who grew up in the 90s, who woke up every morning on the weekends and all to watch the TV show that was airing at that point. Now, of course, you have X-Men 97, but back in the day when we used to have to follow, the TV program that was going on at that point in time, we essentially was so taken in by all of these different stories which were going on. So this particular omnibus, in fact, is something that adapts all those cartoons and puts it into a sort of a comic book format. So you'll find the same shows that were aired at that point being put up out here. And it is something that I really loved. I'm so glad that Marvel decided to put this out, and I enjoyed reading it. I know many others did as well. So if you haven't read it already, please do check it out. If you haven't seen the show, please go check that out as well. And finally, coming in at number 1 is the Uncanny X-Men Omnibus Volume 2. Okay, now this, of course, has 2 major events. Okay, it has the Dark Phoenix Saga and Days of Future Past. In fact, for the Dark Phoenix Saga, if you haven't had a chance to check out the omnibus called Phoenix, do check it out. It has so many of the issues included here, as well as many others, the complete arc as well. But this is the original one, obviously, and this is the one which many of us still hold, and it is considered to be the best X-Men story out there. Of course, you'll have many who will say that like in Uncanny X-Men Volume 3, you had God Loves, Man Kills, which many cite as the best X-Men story. Some would in fact say the other one included here, for instance, in the Volume 2 edition, is Days of Future Past, which I also think is very, very good. But that being said, I think, when you have all these stories, where you have Wolverine's first solo story, you have, the Savage Land adventure, you have, a deeper dive into understanding all these characters and the way they are and what makes them tick. I think this is the one that, start to finish, really stands out for me. Really stands out for me. And I think Chris Claremont, obviously John Byrne, and Stuart Immonen, if I've not said his name wrong, I think they did a phenomenal job, and I think those issues really have stood the test of time. And not to mention, look at this cover. I mean, of all the covers I see here for all these 6 that I've chosen, I think this is the one that's my absolute favorite. It just is so, riveting. It makes you want to, just open this book and read it. So guys, thanks so much. That's my list. I look forward to hearing from you as to what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have a different order and ranking? What would be your thoughts on this? Love to hear from you. Again, thanks so much to all of you who have always supported me, and those of you who asked me to do this video. It was so much fun, and I look forward to the next one. We'll catch you then. Take care.